Hello, viewers. You've heard me come on this It Depends podcast before because we've been talking about data catalogs and how data catalogs are such a rage these days. I've been doing a series of interviews talking to some of the upcoming data catalogs. Today, it gives me great honor to talk to Prukalpa. She is an indomitable, the tireless leader of Atlan. Hardly a day goes by when I don't see an update from her. Her topics range from modern data stacks to controversies surrounding bundling versus unbundling of architectures. And I'm really happy that Prukalpa could take time off her hectic schedule to join this episode. With that, I will hand over to Prukalpa so she can introduce herself. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Sanjeev. Thank you so much for having me. And I still remember our first conversation much before I started updating or writing about like a ton of my thoughts around the modern data stack, but like really enjoyed like sort of a lot of our conversations around the future of data governance and where that's going. So super excited to be here on the show. My background, I mean, where do I start? I've been a data practitioner my whole life. Prior to did a lot of work in the data science with social good space. So we said large scale problems like national level healthcare and poverty alleviation didn't use data and it felt like they should. And so, my co-founder Varun and I said, we should go do something about that. And our model at our first company turned into that we basically became like the data team for our customers. We were typically working with folks like the United Nations or the World Bank or the Gates Foundation. Obviously, they didn't have data teams or technology teams, right? And so we just became their data team. And I'm very thankful for that exposure because it allowed us to work with a wide variety and scale of data, right? At one point, we were processing data for 500 million Indian citizens and billions of pixels of satellite imagery a day. So just really dream projects for a data practitioner in some ways. So that was on the outside. But on the inside, it was not a dream at all. It was a chaos, right? I think as a data leader, I have faced every single fire drill that possibly exists. Like I've had cabinet ministers call me at 8 in the morning and say, the number on this dashboard doesn't look right. And I've woken up and opened up my laptop and like literally with palpitations, looked at the numbers and I'm like, yes, that clearly is wrong, but not knowing what to do, right? And I would typically say, I'll call you back. And then I'll call my project manager, who'll call my analyst, who'll call my engineer, take us 8 hours to figure out what went wrong. I have sat on the top of our terrace this month and cried for 3 hours because an analyst quit on me exactly a week before a project was due. And he was the only one who knew everything about our data. And I was in this position where I have promised my client that I will deliver this project in a week. And I can't because all our knowledge about our data walked away with this person, right? And so just dealt with the fire drills. And these are not single instances, right? Like this was the day in our life. We were spending 50-60% of our time dealing with these kinds of issues. And we just realized we couldn't scale like that. And so that's sort of when we said, we have to find a better way for us to scale. And we started actually building an internal tool for ourselves. We actually tried to buy a solution, which is a story for its other time. Maybe we'll go into it today. So we tried
I was going to ask you, did you try to buy a tool instead of building one from scratch?
We absolutely tried to buy a solution. So I got my data team together. We came up with like a list of everything we wanted to like fix in our data workflow. And then we started an evaluation. And for 3 months, we evaluated tools. We would have evaluated like 10, 15 tools, everything that was in the market back then. And we actually shortlisted a startup. The startup's not around anymore, but we shortlisted this one startup that was at least sort of like, they were like 40-50% in the direction that we wanted to go. And so we sent them an email. Actually, I still have this email. We sent them an email with like a list of features. We were like, if you can build these 20 features, can you commit to it in your roadmap? We will buy. And the startup got back to us and they said $20,000 per feature.
Oh, wow.
I was like, okay, that's not going to work. So we were really forced to build. So over 2 years, we actually just built tooling for ourselves. Atlan was never supposed to be a product that we sold to someone else. We were just like, we have to make our data team work better together. In that time, ran over 200 data projects ourselves as a team. And we were just building internal tooling to make our team more agile and effective at that time. And eventually realized we'd made our team significantly more agile and realized that we'd built tooling that was more powerful than we had intended. And that was around the time that data teams were starting to become a function inside organizations. Roles like chief data officers were a lot more mainstream. The modern data stack was just starting to get started. And so we said, can we actually help all the other data teams around the world with the tools that we built for ourselves? So that's really how Atlan was born.
So Prukalpa, that's just an amazing story, and I love it when products are born out of a desperate, dire need to solve a problem, because that's the best possible outcome. You know, you have a problem, you're in the trenches, and now you've built something to solve your problem. Now, the thing is that there are so many data catalogs. You know, there are at least, 70 or so that, I generally look at. So how is Atlan unique? What makes Atlan stand out? Like when you go to a prospect, there are so many choices. Why do they pick Atlan?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a couple of things, right? And I think let's actually start with we very candidly don't call ourselves a data catalog at Atlan, right? And that's actually intentional.
What do you call your product?
We call ourselves a collaborative workspace built on active metadata.
Collaborative workspace. Okay.
And the reason for that is actually because if you think about this industry, traditionally, you have basically taken a bunch of metadata from a bunch of different tools to solve a problem that you say is a silos problem. And then you bring it into this one tool and you call it a data catalog or a data governance tool, depending on which part of history we're looking at, right? But the problem with that approach is that it actually adds one more silo tool to solve the problem of silos. Now you think about this from a consumer perspective, right? Consumers, let's pick when I am in a dashboard and I'm like, can I trust this dashboard? I don't want to go jump into a different tool and search for that dashboard and then look at the lineage and understand if like the pipeline was updated, right? I want context where I am, when I am, yes. Right? And so one core thing that we think about a lot at Atlan is actually this concept of metadata activation, which is how do you actually, yes, bring metadata together, make intelligent connections through your metadata, but take it back into the experiences and tools that end users are using every day, right? Which is BI tools, which is, DBT, which is, your orchestration layers, like the tools that or your Slack or your Jira, the tools that, your end users are using every day. How do you really power those experiences to make those experiences significantly better? The second core, I think, challenge with our space has been that we have, the core thing that we believe at Atlan is the only reality is diversity in our data team. Right?
Sorry, the only reality is what?
Is diversity, right?
Diversity, I see.
So you think about like a data team, analyst, engineer, scientist, business, marketing analyst, different from financial analyst. The data organization is complex and the data organization is diverse. Now that diversity is actually our biggest strength, but it's also our biggest weakness, right? But if you think about for these people, context means different things to these different people, right? If I think about the single source of truth, the single source of truth for a data engineer is probably, did the pipelines fail today or not? They probably want to know, did the data quality tests pass or not? When they look at lineage, they want to look at it from an impact analysis perspective. A business user doesn't care about any of those things. Context to a business user is, what does this metric mean? How do I measure annual recurring revenue, which is the verified table that I can use against this? And so traditionally what we have done in this ecosystem is we've created generalized experiences for all the different kinds of users. We've treated diversity like it's a bug, but actually diversity is not a bug, it's a feature of a data, right? I like it. So you have to, so in today's world, in Netflix, you're able to create these personalized experiences, right? Like you and I get very different personalized experiences based on who we are. Why can we not create similar kinds of curated and personalized experiences for our data teams, right? And so that's the real sort of second major place where we differentiate ourselves, where we have this, concept of what we call personas and purposes, where we're really trying to build personalization into the way that people actually access context and think about their single pane of glass inside the organization.
So what are some examples of personas that you support?
So we actually allow customers to curate the personas. So what we have tried to do is actually build complete customization capability to the customer. So we've had right from customers being able, because the reality is that, every organization is different, right? The way they're structured is different. Even roles and functions inside the data team are still evolving, right? And so customers can actually create, we've seen, you can create data engineer personas, analytics engineers personas, but you could also create your own purposes, right? So you could say, marketing segmentation is a purpose that's associated. So the way we think about this, if you think about the axes of data, right? One is your role and your team. And the other is your purpose. What kind of work are you doing? Which is where like data mesh, domain, like those kinds of elements come in. And we've actually made those like first-class citizens, where almost if you think about what Wix did in the website builder days, like the early website builder days, right? Where you could create actually modular experiences. We have tried to bring that together with the e-commerce like personalization for these different kinds of user personas inside an organization.
So this is interesting. I'm understanding your big advantage is this the intense focus you have on persona-led user experience and the ability to customize the product to meet the persona's unique needs.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So one thing that surprises me though is that I agree that every company is different, but at the at a very basic level, they're trying to do the same things, right? I mean, they're all trying to analyze the data and look for patterns and trends and data quality anomalies and stuff like that. What's your view on that?
Yeah, I think at a high level, everybody wants to access data, trust data, that like at a very high level, absolutely, right? All of us have pretty much the same problems with our data stack. But the reality of how that gets organized and structured inside organizations is very, very different, right? And so Atlan's built on what we call a metadata activation platform or an active metadata platform. And so the way we think about this is that how do you create, of course, like DIY packages? So customers, like one of our principles is like, you should be able to get started in 30 minutes without engineering involvement. But what we have realized is that DIY can take you 70% of the way. Even with, for example, things like, there's a lot of talk around augmentation in data management, right? But augmentation in data management has never really lived up to its dream. If you talk to customers, I've never spoken to a single customer in my life who's like, yes, my data management platform is truly intelligent, right? And so why is that? We are data practitioners, right? We know that every machine learning algorithm is as good as the training data that goes behind it. And the reality is that every industry, every team, every company is different. And so yes, you can standardize. You can standardize to 70% of the way, but the rest 30% is going to be unique. And what we have tried to do is actually build that into the very fundamental of the way the platform operates, right? Everything in Atlan can be customized. So for example, we have this concept called bots, where you can actually go in and build in these automation frameworks on Atlan. Now, part of this is DIY available as bots. So PII is a great example. We have an automated personally identifiable information bot that auto-classifies your PII data. But there are generic global PII algorithms. And then there are customers of ours that actually work in specific geographies where their governments have unique IDs, right? Or unique social security numbers, which are very different. Like a global PII algorithm will not recognize that. And so they're able to quickly customize it to their needs and still achieve like sort of 100% automation. And so that's the fundamental premise. Of course, I've given you an example from bots, but that same fundamental premise we brought into personas, purposes, everything that we do, which is how do you actually create extensibility and customizability for customers so that they can actually go 100% of the way to solve a lot of these problems.
It's so interesting listening to you as if I'm like listening to myself here. Because last week I did a keynote called The Future of Data Catalogs. I'm not sure if you watched it, but it's like we're so much in sync. And a couple of things I said was, data catalogs don't need to be standalone. They need to be embedded in your workflow and other products. And the second thing is that metadata is not just about describing data, it's about prescribing actions. And it needs to be activated. And what I proposed was that metadata becomes the orchestrator of the entire data pipeline. And based on how the metadata is changing, you basically send your next best action, if you may, to that tool.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you're like speaking my language, right? I mean, like, so the reason we call ourselves a active metadata platform is because we really believe that we've only scratched the surface of what metadata can do, right? Like, we use metadata for data catalogs or discovery or governance, but these are just use cases of metadata, right? If you think about the future, you should be 90% of my users log into my BI tool at 10 a.m. on a Monday morning. I should be able to use that to auto scale up my compute clusters in Snowflake, auto update my pipeline 15 minutes before, auto scale down everything when people log out, right? There are tons of use cases of like metadata activation or how metadata, in some ways, as I think about the true intelligent data management platform dream, I think metadata and activating metadata can really hold the key to be able to do that. And so, for example, at Atlan, like we're today the only platform that actually allows you to actually build these as workflows or metadata orchestration workflows, which is sort of like actually bots that I mentioned, which can actually allow you to do some of these sort of orchestration workflows through your metadata.
Some of the use cases that I'm thinking about metadata and how powerful metadata is, I could, based on the metadata change of its state, I've heard you talk about it's a control plane of data, which I love. I think that's exactly what it is, So based on how the metadata changes, I can do my data quality. I can ascertain if I have security issues, like that I need to fix, data privacy, data integration based on metadata and relationships. I can infer and do some sort of like augmentation in my integration, data observability, data orchestration. The number of use cases just keep adding on. So knowing this, what is the roadmap for Atlan? Where do you see Atlan in maybe 3 to 5 years?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so I think our biggest focus has actually been building the platform that can enable these use cases, right? Because the reality are the use cases are going to be like infinite. I think we are, as a data ecosystem, discovering, like, in fact, like every time I speak to customers, I discover new use cases of how metadata can be used to solve sort of daily problems and workflows that organizations are facing, right? So our biggest focus has been on building the platform and building the extensibility into the platform. So Atlan's built on a marketplace where customers can go in and build these packages which solve for a ton of these use cases that you talked about, right? So of course we bring in all your metadata into one place, but these packages are what basically become the activation packages that you can take and take back into solving a ton of these use cases. So our biggest focus has been on building the platform. And the way I see the world in the next 3 to 5 years, right? If you think about the data stack is relatively more well-formed today than it was, or the modern data stack more well-formed today than it was even like say 3 or 5 years ago, right? So you do have your ingestion, you have your warehousing processing layers, your Snowflake, your Databricks, your 3 clouds, you have your transformation, your BI layers, like your data science applications. That's sort of what I think of as the data stack. But the reality, yeah.
So Prukalpa, I'm curious, how big is your engineering team? And the reason I'm asking this is because I'm wondering that, this whole concept of having these bots is super powerful, but would you consider having a marketplace? Even taking it a level further, would you open source it so the community can build these bots that run on your platform? So Atlan becomes a platform. The company that comes to my mind is Airbyte. Fivetran has the fixed number of connectors that it builds, but Airbyte has a long tail of connectors because the community is building these connectors. So is that a concept that Atlan is thinking about?
Yeah, absolutely. So Atlan's actually built on open source. We're really big on giving back to the open source community. We're open by default. It's actually one of our core principles as an organization. And so one of our core goals as we think about building the platform has actually been exactly that, right? A single company cannot ever, like if you think about the metadata space, a single company will never be able to support all the integrations that it takes to be the true control plane, right? And so, as we think about like sort of growing that out, this allows us to allow customers to build their own bots. It allows partners to build their own bots. It allows the community to build their own bots and like actually build that out as an ecosystem, which are reusable templates that other people in the community can use. And in fact, we actually have like a bunch of customers who are already building on it, and we're super excited. We will have an announcement soon coming up.
I see. When is that announcement? Do you have on the spot? Okay. Let's leave it at that. So the other topic that you've been super active about is this whole bundling versus unbundling. And I know you've done one episode. Another one is coming up, I believe, if I follow your blogs. When you take Atlan or the capabilities of a collaborative workspace or a data catalog, and you attach it to a tool that people already use, is that like, are you now bundling these capabilities so you have fewer moving parts?
Yeah. So I think a couple of things. I think, the bundling versus unbundling argument stretched for a really long time in the ecosystem, right? And I think the answer sort of is like somewhere in the middle, right? I think we're now at this very strange time in the data ecosystem where there's been a ton of venture capital money that's been thrown in the ecosystem. And I think that's created like way too much fragmentation. Almost like I joke about this to everyone I speak to, like I'm like, I would hate to be a data buyer right now in the market. I would hate to be a buyer, right? It's just so confusing. And so I think where we are right now, I think we definitely need, and there will be more bundling. And I think we've already started seeing this with like Biden Grouperoo and like Rudderstack. And like, I think you're already seeing early signs of bundling. And I think about bundling a lot from a DNA perspective. This was actually one of my predictions that reverse ETL and data ingestion, I was like, the capabilities of like piping data in and piping data out like seem like they should be similar. Like, this seems like it should be the same category, right? And so I think you'll start seeing more bundling wherever, especially the fundamental DNA, right? Of so you're seeing metrics layers merge with transformation layer. The DNA of the build of a metrics layer and transformation layer often tends to be similar, right? And so I think that's one layer that I see. However, I don't think we'll ever end up in a bundled data platform world. In fact, I think that's a terrible world, right? Because that was the world we came from,
a monolith.
Right?
Yeah.
And that world is actually a bad world, right? Because it means, there's limited innovation. There's lots of, single vendor autonomy. That's not a good world for the data world, right? Like, I would not want to live in that world, right? And so I think there will always be diversity, and there always will be a slightly unbundled ecosystem, right? Now, knowing that, I think the way I see an active metadata layer playing is it actually is the glue that binds this diverse ecosystem together, right? Like there will always be diversity of personas. There'll be diversity of tools. The active metadata layer bundles these together, makes them interoperable, and creates the ideal data experience, right? How do you create the ideal data experience in a BI tool? You need to know if the data ingestion tool was updated and the data pipeline was updated, and that needs to come back to your BI tool, right? Now, yes, the BI tool can achieve it by going in and actually integrating into every other tool in the ecosystem. But that's kind of inefficient, right? Like, I mean, every tool creating integrations to every other tool permutation combination in the ecosystem seems like pretty inefficient, right? And I think that's really where the collaborative glue layer can come in, where you actually play the role of binding together all this metadata, making sense of it, making it intelligent, and then taking it back into each of these tools to actually improve the experiences in a way that a bundled data platform would actually be able to do.
The idea that just crossed my mind was that this whole bundling, unbundling discussion needs to be more of a hybrid. There are some places where it makes sense to bundle and some places where it does not. So to support your point about diversity, I may use a different tool to do my data intelligence. I may be a SQL programmer, but somebody else wants to use Python, somebody wants to use Spark. one idea that just crossed my mind was what Google Cloud announced last week with Big Lake. They're bundling the data lake and the cloud data warehouse, but then they're giving you the diversity of whatever tools you want to use, but then they're centralizing some fine-grained access control. So there's a common audit log and an ability to track the usage of data. So I see, in fact, even in data mesh, and I want to talk to you about data mesh and see what your views are. I feel in data mesh, it's great to have this decentralized, domain-driven architecture where different domains own the data and they're accountable for it. But then I see data catalog or the metadata layer as one way to enforce common definition and policies. So to me, it's a combination of some decentralization and some centralization. And when it comes to security, governance, privacy, I see a more centralized role. What's your view of data mesh?
Yeah, I mean, I actually fully agree, right? I think that like active metadata is really a key to be able to achieve like sort of a data mesh kind of paradigm, right? And I think there's a lot of noise about data mesh, right? But if you fundamentally break it down, it basically comes out like I think you can achieve data mesh even just in a centralized architecture. Like, I think that you can actually have like the fundamental principles of data mesh you can achieve even with just a Snowflake architecture. You actually don't need like a I think
like Snowflake. You could build the whole thing on Snowflake.
Right? And I think that's the argument that people get stuck in, which is an architectural level argument. But I actually think the fundamentals of data mesh, right? A lot of what they talk about, the concept of data as a product. Like I think a lot about this, right? How can you actually enforce shipping standards into the way that you're shipping your data products? And that should ideally happen at a practitioner level, where you are sort of going a little bit from this services mindset to like, what does it mean to actually ship data products and make this available, reusable and reproducible asset for the rest of the organization. Metadata can actually hold the glue for a lot of this, right? If you think about, I think one of the core principles in the data mesh is this concept of federated governance, right? What really is federated governance? It's basically saying, I'm going to get a bunch of metadata across all of my domains and my data products. I'm going to put it together in a central discovery plane. But I'm then going to start using, this is where the concept of activation really comes alive, right? Going from this centralized model of governance where you have data stewards that are going in and trying to enforce standards. Now you actually have usage metadata about your data products, and you can use that to actually say, these are my products that are getting used the most, and these are the products that are not getting used the most. And you could actually like the way I see it is you could actually auto remove it from the central mesh or the discovery plane. You could create a Jira ticket to the data product manager who shipped that data product and say, hey, your product's not getting used, can you go check out? And you can actually do the other way around as well, right? As a positive effect on, or people talk a lot about behavior change and things like that. But you could actually send out like, the products that are used the most, you can actually send out like a forward enforcement loop into Slack and say, hey, these are the products that are used the most. These are the data product managers that have done the best job, right? And so you can actually create these community-based kind of governance systems, fully automated, if you're able to use these active metadata principles to help your community work well together as you think about building out that broader data mesh ecosystem.
Do you have customers who are deploying data mesh using Atlan?
We do, yes. I mean, with Atlan and other tools, because data mesh is a broader paradigm than Atlan, but we've definitely, Atlan as a active metadata layer as customers deploy the data mesh.
When customers are onboarding and or they first start using Atlan, how do they interact? I understand you have a SaaS product. So do they go to SaaS or do they deploy it as a PaaS? What's a deployment?
Yeah, so we have both models. So we have a software as a service, fully managed service for customers. We also do have a virtual private cloud deployment on AWS through a CloudFormation template. So really simple 30-minute setup, but behind the firewall. So we have both models of deployment today. We see a large number of customers absolutely sort of starting to move towards our SaaS and our managed service kind of operations. One of our core principles is this concept that we call just like 30 minutes to aha, right? How do my biggest problem as a data leader was that I never had enough data engineering time. just like no matter what I did, I didn't get enough data engineering time. Data engineering is like the scarcest resource that exists inside an organization. And so one very fundamental belief as we built out Atlan was that you should not need engineering bandwidth to do things that can be automated, that can be done in a DIY plug and play kind of manner, right? And so a lot of the base stuff, right, like setting up a connection, setting up credentials, bringing in your metadata and bringing in your data assets, you've tried to build it in a way that's very DIY, so that your engineering time can go into building, like I believe engineering time should go into building newer things. It should not go into building things that already exist in the world, right? Which can be one click in some ways. And so that's been a core philosophy for us as we've set up the product and hopefully take customers through the setup journey.
One of the things I've heard you say before is that you've completely adopted modern data stack. What does that mean? What if I have decades of legacy data in Teradata, Oracle, or SQL Server, and I use SSIS? How do you work with that?
Well, I mean, the short answer is we don't. And so I would encourage, if that's the case, for you to think about moving to the modern data stack. I think there's a lot that the modern data stack offers today. I think there's a lot that moving to the cloud offers today. Honestly, if you think about your journey, right, like an Atlan's a part of that, but like if you think about your journey of getting to really, a truly data-driven organization, a lot can be accelerated with what is offered today in the modern data stack. The modern data stack is also a hotbed of innovation. All the future innovation products that are being built in the ecosystem are being built on the modern data stack, right? And so there will be a lot more, even today, the modern data stack is very, very far ahead from where we were in the ecosystem, but it's only going to get better, right? And so, the short answer is like, we've had to make a difficult choice to say, we are not going to support on-prem sources because we want to really push the boundary of what metadata can offer in the world, right? And we believe that this future is going to be cloud first, modern data stack first. And so that's what we've chosen to specialize in, go really deep in, build automations in, and really push forward sort of that boundary of the activation layer. In the future, as we open up our package marketplace and things like that, we will have. So this is actually a strategic choice as a company, not necessarily like a product limitation or a platform limitation, right? The strategic choice has been for us to focus on connectors that are, future ready, modern data stack focused and things like that. But in the future, we will probably open up with like, our SI partners, for SI partners to actually build on top of the platform. We have a ton of customers who are sort of sometimes in this phase where they are moving to cloud first, cloud native, modern data stack, but they have some legacy, right? And in that time, hopefully our SI partners can step in to actually help them in that transition.
Like a connector development kit or something that the partners can extend and get metadata. Metadata, comes from so many different sources. A lot of traditional data catalogs are very much focused on structured data, which, we all have come to learn and understand, and we love, a relational database. But you could have metadata in, Kafka topics, machine learning, data integration tools. Now there's a lot of talk on metric store, which is like a metadata for all the KPIs and metrics. What is the scope that Atlan supports for this diversity of metadata?
So we basically have the ability for customers to create their own asset types as well, like going back to sort of like this extensibility framework that we have. So for example, we actually have customers who are creating their own asset types for APIs, where APIs itself are a data asset type that they are basically bringing in their context 360 around their APIs, right? Which is a very different sort of data asset compared to a traditional structured data asset. And so that's sort of been baked into that sort of fundamental extensibility premise, where the type of data asset itself is a fundamental premise, right? And how do you build extensibility to allow customers to build those?
That is great. And what is the architecture? I'm curious, like, how do you, for example, you mentioned knowledge graph earlier. What technology do you use to store the metadata? What's the underlying persistence layer?
Yeah. So we're built on a knowledge graph. I talk a lot about this concept of a metadata lake, right? And so, can you have like that central metadata lake thoughts, which is where all your metadata is stored and processed, and you can actually then build out these connections and activation layers on top of that. Behind the scenes, our workflow orchestration layer is actually built on Argo, which was open sourced by Google, built on Kubernetes. So Kubernetes and Argo is our fundamental sort of scaling engine. That gives us the ability to auto scale. So if you think about why modern data stack or why cloud or any of those things, like what is the real advantage this has created, right? It's created scalability in compute. And so if you think about a solution that's purpose-built in the modern data stack versus a solution that was built traditionally in legacy but has a cloud version, the fundamental difference is you should be able to leverage the true core premise of what the cloud offers, which is scalability in compute. And that Argo layer that we have, that Kubernetes layer, actually allows us to auto scale, which allows us to run a lot of these, because a lot of what I talked about in metadata activation, right? This goes from static metadata, which is what a data catalog was about, to a ton of metadata operations. And metadata operations can be compute heavy. And metadata operations actually have like just-in-time use cases and things like that, right? And that's the layer that we've been able to build behind the scenes that has allowed us to sort of build out this true build from the ground up for the modern data stack type solution.
This architecture that you explain is brilliant, because the way I see it is, if you can build your product completely like, these compute jobs, these are containers that come up, I'm assuming they run, then they shut down. And if you build it on Kubernetes, I'm sorry if I'm like putting a bit of a wrench in your product roadmap. To me, it's like, I could take this architecture and I can put it on anything, anywhere, even bare metal in somebody's data center, as long as it has a Kubernetes engine.
Yeah, you could technically.
Yeah, technically, it's like that may not be your roadmap, but
that's exactly what I said, right? It's not a platform limitation. The platform actually allows us to do it. The question is like, what is the company strategy in some ways?
Correct. Where you want to focus your resources, and you've chosen modern data stack. That's, instead of just running all over the place and supporting everything. So yeah. And where do you use a graph database underneath, or where is the metadata stored?
We do. We actually use Atlas as our graph database behind the scenes. We built a ton on top of Atlas, actually contribute back a lot. But behind the scenes, we use Atlas as our graph database.
I see. That is great. Prukalpa, I am very curious. Changing tracks.
Yeah.
We'll talk about you. You are prolific. What is your work like? How do you ever sleep? Like, how long do you work? Because it's like, and you're like in so many conferences. How do you?
Well, how do I actually sleep? Well, I do sleep. I managed to get 8 hours of sleep a day, but I don't do anything else in my day. That's my secret sauce. Honestly, I'm running like 14, 15 hour days, right? And there's a reason, like the reason I do what I do, and I think all of us at Atlan, the reason we do what we do is we were that data leader. I was that data leader. I was that data leader who sat on the top of my terrace and cried for 3 hours because an analyst quit on me. And that was not a nice place to be. That was not a nice life to live. That was hard. Those were hard times. And I think the ability to be able to help data leaders around the world at real scale, right? Hopefully just even if we can save them like 10-20% of that frustration, if we can help them sleep a little better at night, I think the opportunity to be able to do that, there's this beautiful moment that we're living in today, right? Like this is like a period of, if you've probably tracked data for a very long time, Sanjeev, right? Like, and if you think about what's just happening right now, this hasn't happened in a long time, right? And this is this, I don't like to say once in a lifetime, but there's this moment here where there's an opportunity to like get it right? Like we can get data right, we can truly achieve the promise of this. And I think a lot of that goes to like powering the data team and powering the data leader to actually achieve the promise this time, and we failed. I think in the last couple of decades, we failed a couple of times over, but I think now we have the fundamental principles, the fundamental like architectures, like we have a lot of the fundamentals in place to get it right this time. And so that sort of is what drives me to sort of give it what we give it today.
This is great to hear, because I feel you're in the zone where work has become play. And so for me, this is my second innings of witnessing this pivotal moment in time. The first one was around 1999, 2000, when .com boom was happening. And those were the days when we were on a mission. We thought, I remember the day AOL.com bought Time Warner. And we were rejoicing. We're like, we IT folks are going to rule the world. But it was all based on a little bit of irrational behavior. Today, even though there's a ton of VC money going in all over the place, but I feel I'm reliving the exciting moments for the second time. And could be once in a lifetime. So this is great. So Prukalpa, how has your company grown in the last 2 years that we've been locked down with this pandemic? How many offices, how many employees?
Yeah, so we are actually a super global diverse team. We now are in 13 countries, 40 cities. We're over 100 people, I think now, maybe like 120 people or so. Yeah, super globally distributed. We have offices we have teams right from the Bay Area all the way up to Singapore. So literally, like we have this like running joke where, like when we do our all hands, like the sun is literally setting in one part of the world and rising at another part of the world. So truly global organization. A lot of this is growth we've seen in the last year and a half. We spent a bunch of time in stealth trying to get the product right. Our biggest thesis going into this ecosystem is that the reason this ecosystem, adoption hasn't really happened the way it should, right? Inside organizations, a lot of traditional tools in the space, behind the doors, like a lot of conversations are about how they're shelfware, right? And the reason for that, in a lot of ways in our minds, is experience. At the end of the day, how do you build something that end users love and end users use every day and love using? So we spent a ton of time in stealth trying to get that right. And so it was only towards the end 2020 that we felt like we'd really gotten that right. And then we really started scaling. Through last year, we scaled 10x in number of customers, revenue. We were working with like amazing customers ranging from, WeWork, Plaid, to some of the most sophisticated data organizations, infrastructures, to large companies like Unilever, Ralph Lauren. So taking a lot of pride in sort of where we've been able to come, but also, a lot of the trust that our early teams and customers have given us. And now just hitting we just raised our Series B. So just sort of hitting that growth, that next phase of growth trajectory for us as an organization.
Congratulations. This is fantastic news. What advice would you give to people who are looking to emulate, not in data catalog or collaborative workspace, but anywhere in the space where, there's a lot of new talent coming in? What would be some words of advice for them?
Yeah, as a data practitioner or
as a leader, as a data leader?
A data leader. Yeah, I would say that, so this is literally the best time ever to be a data leader. Like, we can debate all we want in the ecosystem, but being a data leader 4 years ago was really way worse than being a data leader right now, right? And so I think I think it's easy in the short cycles to forget how much progress we've made in the longer term. I think today there's a ton of tools that exist out there in the ecosystem that can make life very, very easy. So I would basically say two things. Whenever you can buy to solve a problem, buy, because there are big problems to be solved that don't require building, right? You have to build. There are certain things that only you can do. Your data culture is one of them. I hope, and I spend a ton of time talking about this concept of Like I really hope we'll get to talk about the modern data culture stack and not the modern data stack anymore, right? Hopefully tools become the easiest part of the problem. So far, unfortunately, a lot of our conversations are still about the tools, and it's still about getting the tools right. But the next problem, and I really hope in the next sort of year or two, we get to this point where the tools become table stakes. The real problem is, how do you build cultural practices in your data team? How do you make your data team function in an amazing way? How do you truly enable the rest of your organization to use with data? Those are questions that only you can solve as a data leader. So I would recommend thinking about those from a first principles perspective and investing early in culture and culture enablement. Invest in functions like data enablement early. It seems like, the most important things to invest in are data engineering and BI and things like that. But none of that matters if you're not talking to your end users, if you're not building things that your end users want, and you're not going back and driving adoption with your end users. And that's where functions like data enablement becomes really, really important inside organizations. So I would really think about that. And most importantly, like, think about it from a first principles perspective. I think we're all figuring this out. There is no prescriptive way to build a data team. Every data team is different. Yours will be different from the others. So learn everything that you can from everywhere you can. But remember that apply with first principles to your org to make it successful in your org.
Very well put. I really like it. You were recently in Austin at the Data Council. What did you find out? Like, what's going on in our space? Anything that surprised you?
Yeah, I was at Data Council, which was great because after 2 years, we all met, which was awesome. It was great to see people. It was, I think, interesting. And I think it was interesting for a couple of reasons, right? I think one core takeaway that I had was, there were a ton of startups there, right? There were a ton of startups there. There was a ton of venture capitalists there, which was very different from like most other technical data conferences that you see, or you've seen, like, say, 2 years ago, right? Now, I actually think this is a great thing because it means that a lot of technical people are going in and actually building products that can solve a lot of the problems that data leaders faced. Like 4 years ago, we had to build these internally. We did, like, I still remember, I have an internal diagram of this stuff, the number of tools we built ourselves as a team. Today I don't have to build that stuff. I can just, like, in 30 minutes, like, buy stuff and we'll be ready, right? And so I think that's actually a great thing. I think we as an ecosystem need to, we have a next batch of data leaders and data practitioners entering. And so something that I think we've been good at as a data ecosystem is I think we're one of the most diverse ecosystems that exist, even as, like, just people and embracing sort of newer tech and meritocracy and a lot of those things. So I think one thing that we will have to do as the pandemic opens up is make sure that we're opening up the communities and making sure that there are newer data practitioners entering these communities, newer data leaders entering these communities and participating in these communities, and just make sure that we're not living in this world where it's all just us, right?
Yeah. Like an echo chamber of, like, everyone. Yeah, in fact, I sometimes feel that because it seems like I'm always listening and following the same, group of people. So that's great. I have one last question for you. I want you to tell the viewers something about you that the world doesn't know. There's a lot, there's a whole National Geographic video I watched on you. So there's a lot we know about you, but something that, is unique,
That's really hard because unfortunately my life, it feels like it's like documented. So I think one weird claim to fame that I have is that I think that before the age of, like, I've seen more natural disasters than more kids under the age of 10. So I have lived through a volcanic eruption, a very, very large earthquake, the largest in Asia, riots, tsunami, all before the age of 10. So on that ominous note.
No, that's interesting. By the way, I lived through some disasters, like governments getting, like, thrown out, and people would tell me that don't come to our city because it's like there's some jinx, but I'm just curious. So,
I mean that too.
so where were you when the earthquake took place? And are you talking about the tsunami in Thailand and those places?
Yeah, so I was in Barren Island in Andamans, where the only dormant volcano in all of Asia decided to erupt, which was, well, me.
Dormant.
I know, dormant volcano decided to erupt, and I was there. I was in Bhuj for the earthquake, which was one of the largest earthquakes in Asia, I think, in the 2000s. So yeah.
And the tsunami?
The tsunami, I was back south in India. So this is the tsunami that, I guess it was Thailand, and like it was that entire.
Yeah, it was. Yeah. Wow. Very interesting. Great. Well, now you are doing your own data tsunami. And thank you for everything that you do for the community, all your updates and your blogs. I know they take a lot of time in addition to running the company. Well, really thank you for sharing your thoughts, and hopefully this summer you have a very hectic schedule, and I'll see you at one of the events this year.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Sanjeev, and thank you for having me. And this has been a super fun conversation. And yeah, hopefully we will get to meet in person very soon.
Thank you. Take care, and thanks everyone for dialing in. This was great. Really enjoyed this conversation. Thank you, Prukalpa.
Thanks, Sanjeev.